The rain gauge beside Daniel Mercer's barn showed 1 inches. It was the most rain western Kansas had seen in months. But by sunrise, the storm had left 2 very different fields behind. On the west side of County Road 14, the brown water moved through a shallow ditch in a steady stream. It carried loose soil from a field that had been planted, failed, and left nearly bare. Mud had washed across the gravel shoulder and collected around the tires of several pickup trucks. Across the road, the water had almost disappeared, not evaporated, not drained into a pond. It had gone into the ground. A dozen pickup trucks were parked along the roadside. Farmers stood beside county employees, a bank officer, and 2 men from an independent soil laboratory. Near the center of the group stood Wade Holloway, the largest landowner in Stanton County. Mud covered the sides of his boots. His pickup sat at an angle near the ditch. One rear tire sunk into the soft shoulder, where runoff from his field had crossed the road. Wade looked from the muddy water, leaving his ground to Daniel Mercer's covered field. Then he looked at the old metal rain gauge mounted on a cedar post beside Daniel's fence. "We got the same rain," Wade said. Daniel nodded. "Yes. Sir." Ruth Calder, a retired county soil specialist, pushed a spade into Daniel's field. The blade disappeared beneath a layer of crop residue. She pressed her boot against it, lifted a block of soil, and turned it over. Thin white roots ran through dark earth. Moisture still held beneath the surface. Ruth set the block beside a clear glass jar Wade was holding. Inside the jar was pale, powdery soil. 18 months earlier, Wade had placed that same jar on a cafe table and called it Mercer family dust. Now Ruth pointed to a faded label on the glass. "Sample M4. She said. "Collected from this marked location before the trial began." Then she pointed to the block of living soil at her feet. "This was taken from the same location this morning." Nobody along the road laughed. Wade looked at the old sample, then at the roots crossing the new one. "We got the same rain," he repeated. Daniel looked toward the muddy water leaving Wade's field. "Yes. Sir. We got the same rain. We just didn't keep the same amount." 30 months earlier, most of the people standing along that road had believed Daniel Mercer was making the worst decision of his life. Some of them had mocked him for it. Some had placed bets on how long he would last. And at least one man had been waiting to buy his farm when Daniel finally admitted the soil was dead. Mercer Dry Creek Farm covered 640 acres outside a small town in Stanton County, Kansas. Daniel's grandfather had bought the first quarter section after returning from military service. Daniel's father had added more ground during the good wheat years. By the time Daniel inherited the farm, 520 acres were used mainly for winter wheat. Another 80 acres were worn pasture. The remaining land held the house, barns, machinery sheds, and 2 aging irrigation wells that could not reach most of the fields. For years, the system had worked well enough. Wheat went into the ground in the fall. Rain came when it was supposed to. The wind always blew. But crop residue usually held enough soil in place. Then the weather changed. The first dry year hurt. The second dry year emptied savings accounts. The third dry year changed the ownership map of the county. Daniel watched neighbors sell land that had been in their families for generations. The Barrows family sold 480 acres. The Keller brothers sold their west section. A widow named Mrs. Avery sold the ground her husband had farmed for 41 years. Each sale brought another Holloway land and grain sign to the roadside. Wade Holloway was not a stranger from a distant investment company. He had grown up in the county. His father had run cattle before Wade expanded into grain, machinery, storage, and land acquisition. Wade understood weather, financing, and scale. He also understood that desperate farms sold cheaper than healthy ones. By the end of the third dry summer, he controlled nearly 2,000 acres surrounding Mercer Dry Creek Farm. Daniel's wheat yield had fallen from a normal average of about 42 bushels per acre to 18 on the acres that were worth harvesting. Diesel had cost more. Fertilizer had cost more. Crop insurance had covered part of the loss, but not the machinery payments, property taxes, seed bills, and living expenses. The old rain gauge outside the barn became a daily reminder of what was missing. It had belonged to Daniel's father. Every morning, Daniel checked it. Most mornings, it was empty. His 16-year-old daughter, Emily, watched him record zeros in a notebook. One afternoon, she asked, "Why do you keep writing it down when nothing fell?" Daniel looked at the empty tube. Because nothing is still a number. At the time, he believed rain was the main number that mattered. He would learn otherwise. Prairie State Agricultural Bank had financed the Mercer family for 27 years. Daniel's father had borrowed from the bank to buy a tractor, repair a well, and add 160 acres. A framed photograph still hung in the bank lobby showing his father receiving a plaque for 25 years of partnership. Daniel noticed the photograph when he arrived for the meeting that would determine whether he could plant another crop. Martin Cole, the bank's agricultural loan officer, placed a folder on the conference table. Martin was not cruel. He spoke carefully, kept his voice low, and used the language of risk management. "We reviewed the last 3 production years," Martin said. "We also reviewed current land values, equipment debt, operating losses, and projected moisture conditions." Daniel waited. Martin opened the folder. "The bank is willing to extend operating credit under a restructuring agreement." "What kind of restructuring?" Martin slid a map across the table. A red line divided Daniel's farm almost in half. "We recommend selling 320 acres. Daniel studied the map. The proposed sale included his flattest fields, his best well, and the quarter section, where his father's name still appeared on an old county plat. "Who made the offer?" Daniel asked. Martin paused. "Wade Holloway." Daniel already knew. Wade had purchased almost every farm around him. Martin continued. "The proceeds would reduce short-term debt, stabilize your position, and allow you to continue farming the remaining acres under a lower-risk wheat fallow rotation." Daniel looked through the glass wall toward the lobby. His father's photograph was visible from the conference room. "So, 27 years gets me a map showing which half to sell?" Martin folded his hands. "This is not a judgment on your family. It is a risk adjustment." Before Daniel could answer, the conference room door opened. Wade stepped inside carrying a clear glass jar. Martin looked surprised. "I thought you were waiting outside." "I was," Wade said, "but this may help explain the offer." He set the jar on the table. Inside was a pale, powdery sample of soil. Daniel recognized the color. "Where did you get that?" "County road ditch after the last wind." "You collected soil from beside my field?" "I collected what your field had already given away." Wade shook the jar lightly. The dust moved like flour. "Mercer isn't farming soil anymore," he said. "He's storing Kansas wind before it leaves the county." Martin did not laugh, but the junior loan officer beside him looked down at his papers to hide a smile. Wade slid the jar toward Daniel. "Maybe you can sell it by the jar. Genuine family dust." The room became still. Daniel looked at the jar. Then at the photograph of his father in the lobby. Wade tapped the old ledger Daniel had brought with him. "Your father kept records because he knew numbers mattered. If he were sitting here, he'd tell you to stop using his notebook as permission to lose your daughter's farm." Even Martin shifted uncomfortably. Daniel closed the ledger. "Then let's use the numbers instead of his name." Wade sat back. "The numbers are why we're here." Daniel looked again at the red line across the map. "How long do I have?" "Wade's offer is open for 10 days. Martin said. Daniel closed the folder. "I'll need all 10. Wade met him again 2 days later at a cafe near the grain elevator. He did not arrive with a lawyer. He did not threaten foreclosure. He bought Daniel a cup of coffee and placed a written offer on the table. The price was fair for drought-damaged ground. That made the decision harder. If Wade had tried to steal the land, Daniel could have rejected him out of anger. Instead, Wade spoke like a man offering a practical solution. "You sell the east half," Wade said. "You clear most of the operating debt. Keep the house. The barn. And the pasture. You could probably make the remaining ground work. The east half has my best well. That is part of why it carries value. And the home quarter? Wade leaned back. You can't farm memory. Daniel. Daniel said nothing. A few men at the counter were listening. Wade lowered his voice. But not enough to keep them from hearing. Your father held this place together in better years. Selling half now may be the only way to keep the house. The words landed harder than an insult. Wade took a drink of coffee. I'd also keep you on for seasonal management. Daniel looked up. On the land I sold you, you know the ground, I'd pay you fairly. So I would farm my father's field for you. You would earn income without carrying the risk. Daniel looked through the cafe window toward the elevator. Wade was not trying to humiliate him. That was what made the offer dangerous. Wade believed ownership was simply a number on a balance sheet. He believed Daniel's attachment to the farm was a weakness that could be converted into wages. I don't make decisions this big angry. Daniel said. Wade nodded. That's why I came to you privately. Daniel folded the offer and placed it back on the table. I didn't say I wasn't angry. As Daniel stood to leave, one of the men at the counter pointed to the glass jar Wade had brought. Maybe put a price tag on that? Daniel. Another man laughed. Mercer Soil Recovery Kit. 1 shovel. 1 prayer. No refunds. The cafe filled with low laughter. Daniel picked up his coat. He did not answer. The next morning, someone had taped a handwritten sign to the bulletin board at the feed store. Mercer Soil Recovery Kit. 1 shovel. 1 prayer. No refunds. Below it, someone had drawn a stick figure, watering a pile of dust. Emily saw a photograph of the sign on a classmate's phone before Daniel knew it existed. By afternoon, another picture was moving around the county. It showed Daniel's thin, uneven cover crop beside Wade's uniform wheat. The caption read, Daniel's Vate Museum. Admission, free until foreclosure. Daniel removed the feed store sign without confronting anyone. He folded it and placed it in the glove compartment of his pickup. Emily found it there later. Why did you keep this? Because one day we may need to remember how certain people were. About the farm, about what they thought they could see from the road. Daniel spent the rest of the 10-day period reviewing financial records. The numbers were bad. Selling 320 acres would reduce debt. Keeping all 640 could destroy what remained of the family's savings. His mother, Helen, lived in the farmhouse and owned a small share of the land. She did not tell him what to do. Emily did not ask him to keep the farm. That made the responsibility heavier. At the local cafe, several neighbors discussed Daniel's situation as if the decision had already been made. One man said, Dirt doesn't care whose name is on the mailbox. Daniel stood near the counter, waiting for his food. He turned and said, No, but debt does. Then he carried his meal outside. He was not yet planning to rebuild the soil. He was only trying to avoid making an irreversible decision while frightened. For another season, he followed the system he knew. He lightly tilled part of the ground to control weeds. He left other acres in fallow. He planted winter wheat when the forecast showed a chance of rain. Then null. 9-inch fell over 2 days. Daniel stood at the edge of the west field and watched water collect on the surface. The ground was dry, but it did not absorb the rain quickly. Thin streams moved downhill, carrying dust and loose soil into the ditch. 2 weeks later, the top few inches were dry again. Wheat emerged unevenly. In some places, seedlings formed weak green lines. In others, nothing appeared. When the winter wind arrived, soil began collecting along the fence. Wade drove past during one of those windstorms. He stopped on the road, lowered his window, and watched dust move from Daniel's field. You ought to put your name on it before it reaches Oklahoma. He called. Daniel kept repairing the fence. Wade drove away. Emily found her father beside the old rain gauge that evening. It rained, she said. Daniel looked toward the field. Yes. Then why is everything still dry? He picked up a handful of surface soil. It broke into powder between his fingers. The rain came. He said, We lost it anyway. That was the first time Daniel understood the farm did not have only a rain problem. It had a soil problem. The next morning, Daniel searched the machinery shed for maps and old conservation documents. Behind a broken cabinet, he found a metal cash box filled with notebooks. They belonged to his father. Most pages contained ordinary farm records, rainfall, planting dates, seed varieties, fuel use, wheat yields, equipment repairs. One notebook included observations from another dry period 26 years earlier. A line written in pencil caught Daniel's attention. The west quarter held longer where the old grass roots stayed. No explanation followed. No detailed plan. Only the observation. Daniel drove to Ruth Calder's house that afternoon. Ruth had spent 32 years working in county conservation and soil management. She had retired 5 years earlier but still visited farms when asked. Daniel placed the notebook on her kitchen table. My father thought grass roots helped the west quarter hold moisture. Ruth read the line twice. He may have been right. Daniel leaned forward. So I plant grass? Ruth closed the book. Your father left you an observation. Note a solution. Daniel sat back. Ruth continued. You keep asking how much rain fell. That matters. It does. But you are not asking what happened after it fell. She pointed toward his farm through the window. Though it was miles away, you may have a rainfall problem, but you also have soil that no longer knows what to do with rain. Daniel frowned. Dirt doesn't forget. Living soil can lose function. She handed the notebook back. Bring a shovel tomorrow. Ruth did not begin with expensive equipment. She began with 3 holes. One in Daniel's most heavily worked wheat field, one near the old grass strip his father had mentioned, one in the worn pasture. They compared soil structure, root depth, surface cover, and moisture. In the wheat field, the surface was nearly bare. The upper layer broke into hard pieces and loose powder. Most roots stayed near the top. Water poured into a metal ring, entered slowly, and began moving sideways. At the grass strip, the soil held together in small aggregates. Old roots and living roots formed channels. Water entered faster. Ruth sent samples to a laboratory. The baseline results showed approximately 1–2% organic matter across much of Daniel's cropped ground. Surface cover averaged only about 18% after the failed crop. The poorest infiltration points absorbed roughly 0.4 inch per hour under the field test conditions. Ruth handed Daniel the results. You have acres, she said. That is not the same as having functioning soil. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. His family had farmed that ground for 3 generations. He had worked it since childhood. The words sounded like an accusation. I didn't ruin this place alone. No, Ruth said, but you are the one holding the shovel now. Daniel looked back at the open soil pit. That evening, he wrote Ruth's sentence in his notebook. He did not like it. That was why he kept it. Ruth advised Daniel not to change all 640 acres. A desperate farmer could lose everything by treating hope as evidence. Instead, they designed an 8-month trial across 160 acres. 80 acres would receive a soil restoration treatment. The neighboring 80 acres would remain under Daniel's more familiar system as a comparison. On the restoration ground, Daniel would reduce soil disturbance, retain residue, plant a diverse cover mixture where moisture conditions allowed, and use carefully controlled grazing only when enough plant material existed. The cover mixture included cereal rye, triticale, oats, radish, turnip, and a limited amount of legume. Ruth warned him that not every species would survive. Diversity improves your chances, she said. It does not cancel drought. Daniel took the plan to Prairie State Agricultural Bank. Martin reviewed the projected cost. The cover crop does not guarantee a cash return. He said, No, the bank cannot finance an unproven conservation experiment as operating production. I'm not asking you to call it proven. You are asking us to lend against it. Daniel left without financing. 2 days later, he listed his old combine for sale. The machine still ran. It was also one of the few assets he could sell without immediately stopping all field operations. He planned to hire a custom harvesting crew for the wheat acres that remained. When the buyer loaded the combine, Emily stood beside the machinery shed. "That was Grandpa's last machine," she said. "I know. What happens if the soil plan fails?" Daniel watched the truck pull away. "Then we own less machinery and the same bad soil." His mother stepped onto the porch after the truck disappeared. "Are you doing this because Wade insulted you?" Daniel shook his head. "No." "Then why?" "Because the numbers insulted me first." Daniel reserved a no-till drill through the local cooperative. The planting window was narrow. A small rain was forecast, and Ruth believed the soil held just enough moisture to establish the hardier species. 2 days before Daniel was scheduled to collect the drill, the cooperative manager called. "We had to reallocate it." "To whom?" "I can't discuss another account. My reservation has been on the calendar for 3 weeks. We prioritize full-service customers when equipment demand exceeds capacity." Daniel looked through the office window toward a new Holloway land and grain truck parked beside the cooperative warehouse. "When did that policy start?" "It has always been part of our discretion." Daniel hung up. That afternoon, he saw the drill moving down the highway behind one of Wade's tractors. When Daniel confronted Wade, Wade did not deny receiving it. "I manage more acres," Wade said. "Priority follows account volume." "You knew my planting date?" "I knew the weather forecast. So did every farmer in the county. You took a machine I had reserved. I accepted a machine the cooperative assigned." Daniel looked toward the dark clouds building in the west. Wade opened his truck door. "You chose independence?" "Independence includes using your own equipment." Daniel spent most of the night repairing an older drill that had not been used in years. Emily handed him wrenches and cleaned clogged tubes. They finished shortly before sunrise. The planting was late. Seed placement was less consistent than Daniel wanted. Then the rain weakened before reaching the farm. The first planting did not produce the green field people expected. Some cereal rye established. Triticale survived in patches. Radish and turnip germinated unevenly. Oats failed in the driest areas. Several rows looked thin enough that passing drivers assumed Daniel's drill had malfunctioned. Wade scheduled a Holloway land and grain field meeting on an adjacent property. He invited local farmers, seed dealers, and bank representatives to view his wheat. At the edge of the meeting, someone asked about Daniel's mixed field across the road. Wade pointed toward it. "That isn't a crop," he said. "That's what grows when a farmer quits making decisions." Several men laughed. Another asked, "Isn't that supposed to be soil restoration?" Wade looked toward Daniel's uneven stand. "No, that's bankruptcy, with more plant species." The laughter was louder this time. Daniel was standing near his pickup on the far side of the road. He heard every word. He did not cross over. He took a photograph of his field from the same roadside angle and wrote the date in his notebook. Then he made a second mistake. He brought a rented cattle herd onto one paddock too early. The plants had not created enough biomass. The cattle stayed longer than planned near the water point and removed too much residue. Ruth walked the damaged strip with him the next morning. Daniel stared at the exposed surface. "I thought grazing would help." "Proper grazing may help. I followed the stocking number. You ignored the distribution." Daniel looked at the hoof marks around the water point. "So, I failed the field." "You failed part of the field," Ruth said. "Now decide whether you are going to hide it." Daniel included the damaged paddock in the report he submitted to the bank. He marked the location on the map. He recorded the grazing dates, cattle numbers, and exposed surface percentage. Martin called after receiving it. "You understand this weakens your case?" "Yes." "You could have excluded that area as an operational error. It happened inside the project." Martin was silent. Daniel continued. "If I hide the failures, the good records mean nothing." The bank did not praise him for his honesty. It tightened oversight. Prairie State required monthly financial reports. The bank refused to extend payment terms on seed expenses. It lowered the projected collateral value of Daniel's unrestored acreage. It required additional insurance for the rented cattle. It refused to count unsold forage as production value. Most importantly, it gave Daniel 9 months to show measurable production improvement or accept a restructuring plan. Then the bank delayed approval on a small operating release until after the best reseeding window had passed. Martin called it a documentation issue. Daniel called it 12 lost days. Wade visited Daniel near the field entrance after hearing about the new conditions. The bank isn't punishing you, Wade said. It is asking dirt to behave like an asset. Daniel closed the gate behind him. Then we'll measure the dirt. Wade looked across the thin cover crop. You sold a working combine to plant something you may never harvest. I sold a machine. You sold capacity? I hired the capacity I need. For now. Daniel did not argue. Wade pointed toward the dry field. You are betting ownership against biology. No. Daniel said. I'm testing whether biology reduces the risk of ownership. Wade shook his head. This is what happens when farmers start reading brochures. Daniel walked away. He did not tell Wade that the project had already failed in several places. He also did not tell him that other places had begun to change. The first useful results were not dramatic. There was no record harvest. There was no sudden jump in land value. There were only small differences that appeared repeatedly. Surface cover on the treated ground rose from roughly 18% to about 61% in the better established sections. Infiltration at several monitored points increased from around 0.4 inch per hour to as much as 1 inches per hour. After light rainfall, soil under residue stayed moist 3 to 5 days longer than nearby exposed soil. Afternoon surface temperatures were lower beneath the cover. After windstorms, less soil accumulated along the fence beside the treated field. Emily helped place permanent photo markers every month. She stood in the same locations and photographed the same view. Daniel recorded every seed cost, grazing error, rainfall amount, and field observation. When a patch failed, he marked it red. When a result looked good, he waited to see whether it happened again. One evening, Emily asked why he kept the 80-acre comparison field when it looked worse. Because without it, we don't know whether we changed the soil or just got lucky. So we're paying to keep bad ground? We're paying to know what the good ground means. The numbers offered hope. They did not solve the farm's financial problems. Daniel still owed money. The wheat crop remained weak. Custom harvesting cost more per acre than owning the combine during a good year. The bank's deadline kept moving closer. Then, Daniel's custom harvester called, I need payment in advance. That wasn't our agreement. I've heard your operating line may not be renewed. Who told you that? I'm not getting into it. Daniel called the seed supplier. They had also removed his 30-day payment terms. At the cooperative, his fuel account had been placed under review within 48 hours. 3 businesses had changed their terms. Daniel drove to Wade's office. Have you been discussing my loan? Wade continued reading a report. People ask questions. What did you tell them? I told them the bank had concerns. That is private information. It is common knowledge that you are under pressure. You made sure it became common. Wade closed the report. I answered questions about risk. I didn't make anyone's decision. You knew what would happen. I knew businesses protect themselves. Daniel stood. Wade added, You wanted independence? Independent men pay in advance. Daniel left without raising his voice. That evening, he transferred money from the farm's emergency account to secure the harvest crew. It was money meant for well repair. The following week, Wade purchased the Jensen family farm 2 miles north of Daniel's place after their irrigation well failed. Daniel helped Mr. Jensen clean out a machinery shed before the closing. They loaded tools, spa belts, grease guns, and old seed signs into a trailer. Mr. Jensen stopped beside a workbench his father had built. You staying doesn't make us cowards for leaving, he said. Daniel set down a box. No, sir. And us leaving doesn't mean your plan will work. No, sir. Mr. Jensen studied him. You really believe you can rebuild that ground? Daniel looked toward the dry fields beyond the shed. I believe some parts are improving. That isn't what I asked. Daniel paused. I don't know yet. Mr. Jensen no. Good answer. Daniel helped him load the workbench last. He never used the Jensens as an example of people who had quit. They had made a decision under pressure. Daniel understood he might still make the same decision later. The difference was that he wanted his choice to be based on evidence, not panic. After buying the Jensen property, Wade ended the informal agreement that had allowed Daniel's custom harvester to use a wide access lane along the east boundary. The lane had been used by both families for 20 years. Wade installed a locked gate. Daniel called him. "My harvester can't turn through the north entrance." "Then use your south road. That adds 11 miles and crosses a narrow bridge. It is your road. We've shared that lane since our fathers farmed here." That was an informal arrangement with the Jensens. "You own the land now?" "Yes." "And you could continue it?" "I could." Daniel waited. Wade said, "You chose independence. Independence includes using your own roads." The harvest crew charged Daniel extra for the additional travel and delay. Nothing Wade did was illegal. Nothing was dramatic enough to make a newspaper. But each decision removed a little time, a little money, or a little flexibility from a farm that had almost none left. The fourth dry season was worse than expected. Spring moisture never fully developed. Several parts of Daniel's cover mixture produced too little biomass to justify grazing. The wheat planted into the treated ground stayed shorter than wheat on some of Wade's heavily fertilized acres. From the road, Wade's fields looked more successful. Daniel's system looked untidy. Residue covered the ground. Some areas held mixed plants. Other areas were thin. One afternoon, wind damaged a temporary fence. The rented cattle entered a paddock that was not ready. By the time Daniel and Emily moved them, the animals had trampled and grazed a strip, meant for later measurement. Daniel stood beside the damaged plot in the dark. Emily held a flashlight while he photographed it. "Do we have to show the bank this one too?" she asked. "Yes. It wasn't part of the plan. That doesn't mean it wasn't part of what happened." Laboratory results added more disappointment. Organic matter had changed only slightly. The difference was too small and variable to support a dramatic claim. Crop revenue had not clearly exceeded the old system. The restoration expenses still appeared on the balance sheet. Wade increased his offer by 5%. The new price was available for 14 days. Then, survey stakes appeared beside the road along Daniel's east boundary. They were technically on Wade's side. But from a distance, they made it look as though the Mercer sale had already begun. By noon, people were saying Daniel had accepted. At school, a boy asked Emily when her family was moving. She came home furious. "Did you sell?" "No." "Then why are there survey flags?" "Wade is surveying his boundary. He knows what it looks like." "Yes." "Why don't you tell people the truth?" "Because anyone who matters can ask." "That isn't fair." "No. You always say that like it fixes something." Daniel looked at her. "It doesn't fix it. It keeps us from making it worse." Prairie State scheduled its final inspection for a cold morning when the cover crop was dormant. Wade's wheat, heavily fertilized and established under better moisture, appeared greener from the road. Daniel's restoration field looked brown, uneven, and flat. Martin arrived with 2 bank representatives. Wade arrived with several neighboring farmers. Daniel had not invited him. Wade said he was present because his purchase offer was part of the bank's restructuring option. They began at the roadside. One of the bank representatives looked toward the dormant cover. "This is the improved field? This is the treatment field," Daniel said. Wade smiled. "That answer tells you most of what you need to know." They walked toward the overgrazed strip. Daniel did not steer them away. "This section was damaged by poor cattle distribution," he said. "We recorded it as a management failure." Wade looked at Martin. He renamed feeding animals and started filing reports. A few men laughed. They moved to the thinner stand. Daniel explained the delayed drill access, late planting, and uneven establishment. Wade lifted a dry turnip stem, bankruptcy with more plant species. He said, the same phrase from his field meeting moved through the group again. This time, Martin did not smile. Daniel pushed a shovel into the ground. The surface looked poor, but roots and residue still held parts of the upper layer together. Wade stopped him. "We're looking at production." "Daniel, not a gardening demonstration." Daniel straightened. "The soil produces the production." Martin checked his notes. The current condition does not demonstrate higher crop income. No, Daniel said. Then, under the current loan requirement, the project has not met the threshold. Daniel looked around the field. The cover crop was dormant. The wheat was short. The overgrazed strip was visible. The organic matter result had barely moved. Wade's survey flag stood in the distance. For the first time, the entire project appeared exactly as Wade had described it, a costly delay before an inevitable sale. Wade waited until the others had moved away. You didn't rebuild the soil, Daniel, he said. You delayed the sale. Daniel looked toward the marked sampling points. Maybe. Wade seemed surprised by the answer. Daniel continued, but the test isn't finished. That night, Daniel's mother found Wade's new offer on the kitchen table. It would clear the pressure. She said, yes. We would keep the house? Yes. And the pasture? Most of it. Helen sat across from him. Your father would understand if you sold. Daniel looked toward the window. I know. That is not permission to fail for him. I know that too. Then what are you waiting for? Daniel placed 2 soil reports beside the offer. I'm waiting to find out whether the bank is measuring the wrong result. Prairie State wanted measurable production improvement. Daniel's wheat yield had not yet provided it. He spent 2 nights reviewing his records. The treated field had not produced a miracle crop, but it had shown other changes. Water entered faster. Moisture remained longer. Ground cover reduced wind exposure. Input requirements were beginning to shift. Forage had been produced, even if less than hoped. The soil remained cooler. Daniel called Ruth. I can't prove higher yield. Then don't claim it. The bank will call the project a failure. What did the project aim to restore? Soil function. Then measure function. Daniel created a revised evidence plan. He would compare infiltration, moisture at multiple depths, ground cover, wind erosion indicators, runoff, usable forage, input cost, plant survival time, and yield stability rather than only maximum yield. He paid for independent laboratory sampling with documented collection procedures. Emily created a map of every sampling location. They numbered the sites, photographed each one, and kept copies of the original records. At the next bank meeting, Martin read the proposal. This does not replace revenue. No, Daniel said. The loan is repaid with revenue. Yes. Then why should the bank consider this? Because a farm that loses water and topsoil carries more long-term risk than one producing the same crop while retaining both. Martin leaned back. You are asking us to believe recovery will eventually become income. Daniel shook his head. I'm not asking you to believe the field looks better. I'm asking you to measure whether it functions better. Martin closed the report. The sale offer expires in 8 days. Then we should collect the evidence before it does. 2 days later, Wade sent the bank an appraisal prepared by a consultant who worked with several of his land purchases. The report emphasized current wheat production, nearby sale prices, and the limited immediate cash value of non-commercial vegetation. One sentence appeared in bold. Non-commercial vegetation may improve appearance without improving repayment capacity. The report did not contain false data. It simply ignored infiltration, soil loss, moisture retention, and reduced long-term risk. Martin forwarded it to Daniel. Daniel called him. Are you using Wade's appraisal to decide whether I must sell to Wade? It is one of several market references. He paid for it. It was prepared by a licensed professional. It measures the farm as though water and topsoil have no value until the day they become wheat. Martin paused. Then your evidence must show why the appraisal is incomplete. The weather forecast changed 3 days later. A large thunderstorm system was expected to cross western Kansas. Rainfall estimates ranged from 1.5 to more than 2 inches. After months of drought, people called it good news. Ruth called it a test. Dry ground does not automatically absorb heavy rain. She told Daniel, if the surface seals, most of it may leave the field. Daniel and Emily checked the treated ground. They inspected waterways, fences, residue cover, measurement markers, and runoff points. A wind gust had moved residue away from part of a slope. Daniel tried to redistribute it. But the storm arrived before he could finish. Lightning moved across the southern horizon. Wind hit the farmhouse first. Then the rain came hard enough to erase the view of the barn. The old metal gauge filled faster than Daniel had seen in years. Water poured from the barn roof. For nearly an hour, the storm stayed over the area. Daniel wanted to drive to the fields immediately. Ruth told him to wait. You will damage the road and the plots. Bedum. The rain gauge showed 1 inches. Daniel put on his boots. Emily followed him outside. At the first restored field, they stopped. There was water in the drainage path, but it was not carrying the thick brown sediment Daniel expected. The covered surface had slowed the movement. Water had entered the ground through roots. Residue. And improved soil structure. At several monitoring points, moisture had moved into the 12-inch layer. On the comparison field, water had moved faster over the surface. A thin layer of silt marked the flow path across County Road 14. Muddy water was pouring from land Wade had purchased from the Jensens. During earlier grading work, Wade's crew had reshaped a lane and concentrated part of the surface flow toward the roadside ditch. The work was legal, but now the ditch was carrying a thick stream of brown water. The two fields had received the same storm. They had not retained the same storm. Daniel did not celebrate. He called Ruth. Then he called Martin. Come measure it, he said. Word moved through the county quickly. Ruth organized a field walk with the Independent Soil Laboratory and county conservation staff. Daniel did not invite reporters. He did not post photographs accusing Wade of poor management. He invited farmers. He invited the bank. He invited the families who had sold land. He invited Wade. Wade arrived early with the clear glass jar of Mercer soil. He had used it so many times that the phrase family dust had become part of the county's joke about Daniel. His pickup pulled onto the shoulder near the muddy ditch. The ground beneath one rear tire gave way. The truck settled several inches into soft mud. Wade tried to move forward. The tire spun. Mud struck the side of the truck. Several men looked away to hide their expressions. Daniel's tractor was parked near the field entrance. He walked over with a chain. Wade stepped out. I can call someone. You already did, Daniel said. He connected the chain and pulled Wade's pickup onto firmer ground. Daniel removed the chain without smiling. Wade looked at the mud on his truck. Then, at Daniel's relatively clean field entrance, you don't need to make a lesson out of it. Daniel coiled the chain. I didn't. The group began at the comparison plot. Ruth showed surface sealing, runoff marks, root depth, and moisture readings. Then they crossed to the treated ground. She poured water into an infiltration ring. The soil accepted it faster than it had at the beginning of the project. The laboratory representative explained that not every sampling point showed the same improvement. Some remained weak. The overgrazed strip remained visibly damaged. The slope where residue had moved showed more runoff than the best covered ground. Daniel had not removed those points from the report. That made the stronger results harder to dismiss. Emily opened a large field map on the tailgate of Daniel's pickup. Each point was numbered. Beside the map were rainfall logs, moisture readings, fixed location photographs, failed seeding records, grazing notes, and independent laboratory forms. Martin picked up the failure log. You included the cattle, damaged strip in the average? Yes. And the late planted section? Yes. Why? Because the field did. Ruth pushed a spade into the treated ground. She lifted a block of earth and turned it over. Roots crossed the soil. Moisture remained below the surface. Then she took the glass jar from Wade. Sample M4, she said. Collected from this exact marked location 18 months ago. She set the pale dust beside the new block of soil. This morning's sample came from the same point. The old sample collapsed when she pressed it. The new sample held together around roots and small pores. A man from the cafe stepped forward. He had been the one who joked that Daniel should sell family dust by the jar. He looked at the two samples but said nothing. Ruth repeated the process across the road. The second block was drier near the top and broke into larger, harder pieces. Water still moved through the ditch behind them. Wade stepped closer. He studied both samples. "We got the same rain," he said. Daniel looked at the old rain gauge beside the fence. "Yes, sir." The group waited. Daniel did not raise his voice. "We got the same rain. We just didn't keep the same amount." Wade pointed toward the new soil sample. "One storm doesn't make a farm." Daniel nodded. "That's right." Wade appeared ready to continue. Daniel turned toward Emily. "That's why we brought 18 months of records." Emily laid out the sequence. The first infiltration tests, the failed drill planting, the overgrazing error, the winter dormancy photographs, the moisture readings after small rainfall, the wind loss comparisons, the independent samples. The 2.1-inch storm was not the proof by itself. It was the moment when the proof became visible. Martin read the preliminary report. The treated ground showed greater infiltration at monitored points, longer moisture retention, better cover, and reduced visible soil movement. The evidence did not prove Daniel's entire farm was restored. It did prove the land could recover function. Martin asked, "What happens if the next year is dry again?" Daniel answered, "Then we measure whether this ground loses less. What if yields remain low? Then I expand only where reduced risk and lower input cost justify it." "You are not proposing conversion of the whole farm?" "No. 80 acres proved enough to continue. It did not prove enough to gamble 640. Martin looked at Daniel for several seconds. That answer mattered more than a speech about family legacy. Daniel was not asking the bank to finance faith. He was presenting a controlled plan. Martin closed the report. "The bank is withdrawing the forced sale condition." Nobody moved. Wade looked toward him. Martin continued, "The revised collateral review recognizes measurable improvement in infiltration, erosion control, and water retention on the treated acreage. The current evidence supports a staged operating plan rather than an immediate land sale." Wade's jaw tightened. "What about the appraisal?" "The appraisal treated current yield as the primary indicator of value. That is how farm income works." "It is part of how farm income works," Martin said. "It did not adequately account for documented changes in long-term land function." Wade looked toward the red survey flags in the distance. Martin added, "The bank's revised appraisal no longer supports the purchase condition at your offered valuation." The opportunity to buy half of Mercer Dry Creek Farm at drought pricing disappeared in front of the same people who had watched Wade mock Daniel's field. Wade looked at the glass jar in his hand. Daniel reached for it. For a second, people expected him to pour the dust onto the road or place it at Wade's feet. Instead, Daniel pushed the jar gently back toward him. "You can keep the souvenir," he said. "I need the soil." No one laughed. That silence satisfied Daniel more than laughter would have. Prairie State Agricultural Bank extended Daniel's operating credit. The decision was not based on sympathy. The revised appraisal recognized that the treated land was showing lower erosion risk and improved water use potential. Daniel's records demonstrated operational discipline. The independent sampling supported the field observations. His staged expansion plan limited financial exposure. The bank required continued reporting. Daniel accepted. He did not receive every dollar requested. He did not receive an apology for the sale pressure. But the red line dividing his farm was removed from the restructuring agreement. The 320 acres remained Mercer land. When Daniel left the bank, his father's photograph still hung in the lobby. This time, Daniel did not stop to look at it. He had work to do. 2 weeks after the field walk, Wade drove to Mercer Dry Creek Farm. He found Daniel repairing a fence near the restored field. The glass jar sat on the passenger seat of Wade's pickup. Wade stood beside the truck for a moment. "I priced your ground as if it could only get worse," he said. Daniel tightened a wire. "So did I." For a while, Wade looked across the field. "I have 600 acres east of the highway, losing topsoil every spring. I've seen it. I want you to design a trial." Daniel stopped working. "You want to hire me? I want results. They take time. I understand that better now." Daniel set down the fencing tool. There would be conditions. Wade almost smiled. You own 80 improved acres, and suddenly you have contract terms? I owned the conditions before the acres improved. Wade waited. Every test point stays in the record. Daniel said, successful or not. All right. You don't advertise restored soil before independent data supports it. Wade nodded slowly. And the families who sold you that ground can attend the field reviews. Wade's expression changed. Why? Because their farms are not examples of failure. They sold. They ran out of time. Wade looked toward the road, where the runoff had moved during the storm. And your fee? Daniel named a fair consulting and management rate. He did not double it. He did not use Wade's urgency to take revenge. Wade looked toward his pickup. The glass jar was still visible through the window. You really kept that sample in the records? It was accurate when it was taken. Even after I used it against you? The soil didn't say those things. Wade held out his hand. Daniel looked at it. Then he shook it. Not as a defeated farmer, accepting wages on his former land. As a landowner whose work now had a measured value, Daniel did not turn all 640 acres green overnight. Some parts of Mercer Dry Creek Farm remained difficult. One field still had drainage problems. A compacted headland needed separate treatment. Several cover crop plantings failed during dry periods. Organic matter rose slowly and unevenly. There were still years when the farm's profit was thin, but the restoration system expanded from 80 acres to 360. Ground cover improved. More rainfall entered the soil. Less soil collected along the fences. Some fields required less disturbance and fewer emergency passes. The farm became more stable. Not invincible. Wade's first trial did not succeed everywhere either. One section was planted too late. Another was grazed too heavily by a crew that ignored Daniel's instructions. Daniel included both failures in the report. When Wade suggested leaving the worst photographs out of a presentation, Daniel closed the folder. If the failures disappear, I do too. Wade left the photographs in. The feed store removed the Mercer Soil Recovery Kit sign. Nobody admitted who had made it. Daniel never asked. Emily graduated from high school and entered a soil science program at Kansas State. Every summer, she returned to maintain the sampling map and compare new results with the original baseline. The old metal rain gauge remained beside the barn. Below it, Emily mounted a small wooden sign. It read, "Rain is what falls. Soil decides what stays." One afternoon, the Jensen family visited during a field demonstration. Mr. Jensen's grandson knelt beside a soil pit and touched the roots crossing the dark earth. Was this land dead? The boy asked. Daniel considered the question. People had used that word often during the drought. Dead fields, dead farms, dead towns. He picked up a handful of soil. It wasn't working the way it needed to. Daniel said, "Did you save it because you stayed?" Daniel looked toward the fields that his neighbors had sold, and the fields his family still owned. "Not because we stayed," he said, "because we changed what we did while we were staying." The boy looked at the soil in Daniel's hand. Beyond them, the wind crossed the farm. But this time, the ground did not leave with it.